When a power-hungry HOA tyrant tries to bully her way onto private property, one dad and his son fight back with a fence, the law, and unbreakable resolve. Watch their epic showdown unfold. When Karen shoved a shimmering gold key into my brand new security gate and gave it a confident twist, expecting it to surrender like the old one had, the sharp mechanical thunk of rejection echoed across the cul-de-sac like a gunshot in a chapel. She blinked, twisted again harder, only for the key to resist her in cold defiance. From behind the gate, my 11-year-old son tapped the ring intercom and said with a soft, steady voice, "Hi, my dad said to call 911 if anyone tries to enter our property without permission." "So, I'm doing that now." Karen's face, painted smug just seconds ago, drained like someone had flipped her upside down and shook the confidence out of her shoes. What followed wasn't just a battle over fences, gates, or land. It was the unraveling of her illusion of power thread by thread, all because she couldn't stand one simple, immovable truth. I had finally stopped playing by her rules. The chaos had actually begun a week prior when I decided to upgrade the old rotting cedar gate that separated my land from the public road with a steel-reinforced security gate complete with a smart lock system. It wasn't an act of defiance at first. It was just overdue. But in a neighborhood where power-hungry HOA monarchs think they own the sun, even a gate can start a war. Karen, president of the HOA and self-proclaimed guardian of community standards, was not amused. She sent me a letter printed in Comic Sans of all things, warning me that all gates must remain accessible to HOA-approved emergency personnel and included a shiny key labeled Master. I left the key on her doorstep with a sticky note that said, "Private land? No access needed." That apparently wasn't the answer she was looking for. The morning she attempted her little break-in, I wasn't even home. I had taken the truck to the city hardware store, but my son Josh was at home recovering from a cold and had instructions not to open the door for anyone. Karen must have assumed she could pull her usual power move, waltzing onto the property under the guise of inspection or routine HOA check-in, and that the new gate would simply open to her whim. When it didn't, her face did something magical. It lost all pretense and bared the raw nerve of entitlement. According to Josh's recounting, which I later saw on the intercom video feed, she tried 3 keys in quick succession, all of them presumably duplicates of the infamous master that she believed granted her omnipotence. When none worked, she took out her phone, dialed someone, and whispered sharply, "He changed the lock. He changed the damn lock. He thinks he can lock me out of my own neighborhood." Then she tried to peer through the gate slats. That's when Josh activated the intercom and delivered the sentence that stopped her heart. By the time I returned 20 minutes later, 2 squad cars were pulling up and Karen had reverted to a trembling cocktail of confusion and faux innocence. "He called the police on me," she said as I got out of my truck as if hoping I'd reprimand my son. I didn't. I nodded to the officer, shook his hand, and replayed the video from the smart cam. It showed her trying to open the gate, jiggling keys like a housebreaker, and then saying something about how I was hiding something behind the new fence. One officer smirked. The other asked if I'd like to press charges. I declined then. Karen fumed quietly, arms folded like a child denied dessert. As the officers drove off, I told her calmly, "You step on my land again. That master key's going in the shredder." She hissed back. "You're making a huge mistake. I'm trying to help you follow the rules." I said, "I follow the law, not your fantasy rules." That exchange was the seed that blossomed into the madness that followed because Karen didn't just back off. She doubled down. Over the next 48 hours, I received 3 violation notices on my porch. One for an unregistered structural addition, referring to the fence. One for obstruction of common access, which amusingly was the same gate she couldn't open, and one for failure to submit landscape plans, although nothing in my yard had changed except that I now mowed it twice a week instead of once. I laughed at the last one until I noticed the fine at the bottom. $200 per violation per day. That's when it got serious. I attended the next HOA meeting uninvited, walked into the clubhouse while they were mid-agenda, and asked who had approved the fines. Karen, seated at the head like a queen without a crown, responded with her classic smirk. It was a unanimous decision. You should really attend more meetings. I turned to the board. Was it really unanimous? A few of them looked down. One man, Greg, muttered, "I didn't vote." Another whispered, "I abstained." I asked if minutes had been published. Karen snapped, "We're revising them." That was her mistake. See, I may not be flashy, but I'm stubborn. And I had documented every change, every email, every text. I went home and created a public Google Drive folder labeled HOA Madness and shared it with the entire community. I included video evidence, dated HOA documents, and screenshots of every message Karen had ever sent me, including one where she threatened to repossess the sidewalk outside my gate. The reactions were swift. Neighbors started messaging me privately thanking me. One woman said Karen had fined her $400 for holiday lights left up too long in February. Another man showed me a photo of Karen inspecting his recycling bin for contamination. The cracks were forming, but Karen, true to form, wasn't finished. She began walking her dog suspiciously close to my property line, lingering near my son's window, and pacing as if measuring something invisible. That's when I decided to install motion sensing lights, additional cameras, and you guessed it, prepare for fencing the entire perimeter of my lot. What Karen didn't know was that her obsession with control was about to turn against her. I had researched property laws, consulted a lawyer, and even spoken to the original developer of our subdivision. My land had a quirk in its deed. An overlooked access clause that gave me more legal freedom than she realized. The trap wasn't just set. It was already closing. All because a master key failed to open the wrong gate. Karen didn't take the defeat at my gate as a warning. She took it as a personal betrayal from the universe. Within 24 hours of her failed attempt to assert dominion over my land with her useless master key, she showed up with a rolled-up blueprint under her arm, a grim expression plastered on her face, and a man trailing behind her who looked like he'd just stepped out of a Craigslist ad labeled part-time surveyor, no questions asked. I was working on my truck in the driveway when she arrived, purposefully stepping just short of my gate, probably afraid I'd electrified it since her last visit. "We need to talk about your property lines," she barked as the man unrolled his blueprint on the hood of her Lexus and began pointing with the confidence of someone who had never held a real deed in his life. "According to these plans, your new fence encroaches 4 feet onto HOA-maintained green space," she said, flipping the paper to an overhead satellite image with red scribbles that looked like a toddler had gone wild with a marker. I wiped my hands on a rag and approached slowly, suppressing both a laugh and the urge to slam the hood shut on her imaginary jurisdiction. "That land is mine," I said simply, pointing toward the ground as if the truth would rise up and slap the map out of her hands. "Deed, signed, recorded. Original survey shows it. The new fence is 5 in within the legal line." Her eyes narrowed, scanning me like she was trying to find a weakness behind my words. "This map is from a community overlay done in 2011, she replied. "It updates the boundary agreements." I raised an eyebrow. "Agreements you created after I moved in." Her mouth twitched. The man beside her, Rick, I later learned, cleared his throat. "The community overlay supersedes individual deed lines under HOA Code 9.3, subsection B." It sounded official, but I had already read the bylaws front to back, and I knew for a fact no such clause existed. Still, I played along. "Can I see that code written out?" I asked. Rick turned red, mumbled something about digital copies, and started fumbling with his phone. Karen cut in. "You'll be receiving a formal correction notice. If you don't remove the fence extension within 7 days, we'll be forced to take action." That word again, forced. As if she had her own private enforcement squad ready to rappel down from her HOA throne. I didn't respond. I just walked back to my garage and grabbed my own map, the original deed survey combo from the title company. I unfolded it on the tailgate of my truck right next to their scribbles. It was clear, dated, signed, notarized, and accompanied by coordinate. Karen squinted at it as if it were written in Latin. Rick leaned closer, mumbling something again. "This is a public record," I said. "Filed with the county. If you have anything that overrides this, you can show it to a judge." Karen stepped back. "We'll see what the board says," she spat. I watched her walk away and noticed something strange. Rick wasn't following. He lingered behind her Lexus for a few seconds, pacing slowly, then turned and knocked on my fence post with his knuckles. "She says she's your neighbor, not your enemy," he muttered as if trying to justify what they were doing. I didn't reply. I just locked eyes with him until he turned and got in the passenger seat. As they drove away, I noted something small but important. Karen had left one of her printed violation letters on my mailbox again. This one stating, "Immediate correction required. Unauthorized fence materials." She was throwing darts blindfolded, hoping one would land. But she had just made her biggest mistake yet. That night, I went through the original HOA documents line by line. I printed a clean copy and highlighted every section relevant to land boundaries, fences, access easements, and dispute resolutions. Then I found something truly delightful, a clause that stated any dispute over private land use would require third-party arbitration before fines could be issued. Karen had skipped arbitration entirely. She had gone straight to fines, printed enforcement, and threats. That meant everything she had filed against me was not just wrong. It was out of bounds. The next morning, I contacted Drew, my college roommate turned land use attorney. I hadn't spoken to him in months. But the moment I explained the situation and forwarded him Karen's notices and fake maps, he responded with a 10-word text. "She's toast. Want me to draft something juicy?" Within hours, I had a cease and desist letter ready to send to Karen and the HOA board, citing legal precedent, and quoting their own bylaws back to them with a precision that could slice marble. Drew had included the arbitration clause, a demand for fine withdrawal, and an offer to mediate while warning that failure to comply could result in a counterclaim for damages and harassment. I slid the letter into a manila envelope, addressed it to Karen and taped it to her front door with a note. "You said we'd see what the board thinks. So will I." The next board meeting, which she again tried to exclude me from, was interrupted by a loud bang on the table as I dropped a stack of paperwork in front of the treasurer and 3 other members. "That's the original property survey title deed and a letter from my attorney," I said. "I also brought something else." From my bag, I pulled out a USB drive. "Drone footage," I added. "Taken last month for my son's science project. Shows the old fence line, the new posts, timestamps, and ground markings." Karen looked like someone had just shoved her off a boat into cold water. One of the members leaned in to watch the footage on a tablet. After a few minutes, he sighed and muttered, "It's accurate. The fence is on his land." Another board member nodded slowly, adding, "We were never told about an overlay vote." Karen tried to object, but the room was already shifting. People weren't buying it anymore. Her tight grip on the board was loosening by the second. As I walked out, Karen followed and hissed, "You think this is over? I still run this HOA." I turned around slowly. "You don't run anything anymore, Karen. You just haven't figured that out yet." I drove home and found Josh in the backyard building a model volcano for school. He looked up and asked if Karen was still mad. I smiled. "She's just figuring out what a real boundary looks like." But the story didn't end there. That night, while checking the property lines again with a flashlight, I noticed fresh footprints near the corner post, the soil freshly disturbed. I knelt down and dug a little with my fingers. Something glinted under the dirt. I pulled it out. It was an old key, the same kind Karen had used the first time. Only this one had a number scratched into the side. 0001, she hadn't just tried to break in. She had left a backup, hidden, presuming she'd come back. The war wasn't over. It was only just beginning. When I held that buried key in my hand, caked in damp soil and malice, something in me shifted. It wasn't just the absurdity of Karen sneaking around like a raccoon planting spare keys on property that wasn't hers. It was the realization that she wasn't acting out of frustration or confusion anymore. This was a campaign, a silent, calculated siege. And the worst part, she still believed she had the upper hand. The number etched on the key, 0001, told me everything I needed to know. She didn't see this as one isolated intrusion. She saw this as the beginning of a system, a key ring of access points to land she thought she owned in spirit, if not in law. But this time, I wasn't just reacting. I was building something she couldn't outmaneuver. The next morning, I went straight to the county planning office with a copy of my property deed, Drew's legal packet, and a photo of the key. The clerk, a tired woman with caffeine rings on her desk and eyes that had seen decades of neighbor disputes, took one look at the file and called someone upstairs. Within 30 minutes, I was seated across from a planning coordinator who confirmed what I already suspected. There were no recent overlays, boundary votes, or green space adjustments in our subdivision. If the HOA says otherwise, they're either misinformed or making it up, she said, printing an official copy of the subdivision plat and highlighting my lot lines. You can fence every inch right up to here, including the corner she's been circling like a shark. That map was gold. With it, I could request a fencing permit expansion that would completely seal off the side Karen claimed belonged to the HOA. The moment I returned home, I filed the request online, attaching the new documents and including drone footage as proof of historical fence placement. I expected to wait a week. It was approved the next morning. Karen must have sensed something was happening because I saw her pacing on her driveway again that afternoon talking to someone on speakerphone, her arms waving like she was trying to flag down logic. I stayed silent, let her stew, and called a local fence contractor with a reputation for fast work and tighter lip. We'll have your posts in by Friday, the foreman told me. 2 days tops if the weather holds. I told Josh he could pick the paint color and without hesitation he chose charcoal black. It looks like something Batman would have. He said I like the symbolism. That same evening, as if on cue, a white envelope was slid under my garage door. No stamp, no signature, no HOA header, just a typed page with ominous language. Cease all construction or be held liable for unauthorized alterations to community-owned property. It read, failure to comply may result in legal consequences. I almost laughed. Karen had stopped quoting bylaws because she had already bent them too far. Now she was just inventing threats like a child who didn't get dessert. The next day, while staking out the new fence line with the contractor, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. Not out of fear, but out of disgust. Karen's Lexus was parked partially on my property again, angled just enough to breach the soon-to-be-installed post line. When I walked toward it to take a photo, I saw her sitting inside pretending to be on her phone. She didn't look up. She just stayed there. A monument to spite in leather seats and entitlement. I didn't confront her. Instead, I snapped a photo, timestamped it, and emailed it to Drew with a note. Can I build the fence around it if she doesn't move it? His reply came in seconds. Absolutely. Just don't damage the vehicle. Fence her in. She'll be trespassing the moment it's up. I slept better that night than I had in weeks, but morning brought new madness. As the crew unloaded concrete mix and steel brackets, Karen emerged in a pastel robe, waving another document. This is a temporary restraining order, she shouted. You're not allowed to alter the shared landscape. The foreman glanced at me nervously. I took the paper and scanned it. It wasn't a restraining order. It wasn't even real. It was a printed mock-up of a legal form she'd copied from the internet and filled out with pen. No court stamp, no signature, just her name typed 3 times in different font. This isn't valid, I said quietly. If you give this to the city inspector, you could be charged with document fraud. Her mouth opened, then closed. For the first time, I saw something close to fear flicker behind her eyes. She wasn't used to pushback that didn't crumble. She stepped backward, muttering something about calling the police. Please do, I said. Maybe they can explain the laws you've ignored since January. She didn't call. She just stormed back inside and slammed the door, rattling the wreath that still read, Happy Easter in July. As the fence posts went up, something changed in the neighborhood. I started getting quiet nods from neighbors who usually avoided eye contact. Greg from the HOA board came by with a bottle of soda and said, "We never wanted this to get ugly. She just talks louder than the rest of us." I didn't hold it against him. People like Karen thrive on silence and intimidation. They win not through merit, but because they exhaust everyone else. But I wasn't exhausted. I was energized. Josh spent the afternoon helping the crew mix cement, and one of the workers even let him hold the post leveler straight as a ruler. The guy said Karen didn't come out again that day. But that night the real surprise arrived. I was checking the motion cam footage when I noticed a figure slipping along the side hedge just past the boundary line. The person moved low, slow, and tried to keep behind the taller bushes. At first, I thought it might be a kid until I zoomed in. It was Rick. Same ratty windbreaker, same anxious shuffle. He had something in his hand. When I paused the frame, my blood boiled. It was a garden stake and what looked like a laminated sign. The next morning, I walked the fence line before the crew arrived and found it. The stake had been jammed into soft soil just inside my property. On the sign was a message typed in bold. Notice this land is subject to dispute. Do not proceed with construction. No signature, no legal reference, just a plastic attempt to cause confusion. I pulled it out, brought it to my garage, and duct taped it to a piece of cardboard. Then I drew a smiley face on it, and hung it on my mailbox. Petty, maybe? But Karen understood symbols, and this one told her clearly, your games aren't working anymore. She didn't know that every buried key, every fake document, every lie was building a case. Not just in the court of neighborhood opinion, but potentially if it continued in real court. And this time, the gate wouldn't just keep her out. It would be the opening act to her undoing. It was a calm Wednesday morning when Karen decided to make her most brazen move yet. And in typical Karen fashion, it was done with the blind confidence of someone who'd never been held accountable a day in her life. I had stepped out early to pick up fencing supplies from the hardware store and left Josh at home with strict instructions. Don't answer the door. Don't open the gate and don't talk to anyone unless it's me or emergency services. He had his phone, the Ring app, and a camera view of every side of the house, which he'd learned to use better than I had. What I didn't expect, though, was that Karen would take my absence as an invitation. According to the footage, which I reviewed with a sick, slow burn in my chest, she showed up at 9:14 a.m. wearing workout gear and sunglasses, carrying a gym bag, and what looked like a rolled-up blueprint or legal notice. She stood outside the gate for less than a minute before pulling out a crowbar from her bag and starting to work the side latch of the wooden service gate that hadn't yet been fully replaced. The latch resisted, creaked, bent, then gave way. She slipped inside quickly, looking around like a teenager, sneaking back into the house past curfew, then strutted up my gravel drive as if the property was hers. She didn't knock. She didn't announce herself. She walked straight up to the front porch, past the new fence posts, and tried the front door handle. Locked. Josh, watching from the hallway, stayed hidden, but activated the Ring camera from the indoor monitor. You're not allowed to be here, he said firmly, his voice just barely trembling. Karen paused, startled, then tilted her head toward the camera above the porch light. I'm just leaving a notice, she said sweetly, taking a folded paper from her bag and taping it to the door. But then she did something far worse. She walked back down to the driveway, pulled her Lexus partway up into my property again, further this time, and parked it at an angle that made it impossible for the fence crew to access the corner lot. She got out, pulled her gym mat from the trunk, and unrolled it on my lawn like it was her personal yoga studio. I watched the rest unfold through the recordings with a mixture of disbelief and fury. She positioned herself squarely in the path of the construction, then began loudly reciting breathing mantras, arms extended, pretending to be in deep spiritual practice, as if the chanting would somehow override the trespass. My son called me immediately, whispering into the phone that Karen broke in with a metal thing and she's doing yoga on the grass. I told him to stay inside, lock every door, and keep the cameras running. Then I called the police again. By the time I returned 15 minutes later, Karen was still mid-pose, oblivious to the fact that I was recording everything from my car window. 2 patrol cars arrived moments after me. One officer approached politely, asking her to step off the property. She stood up, brushed invisible grass off her leggings, and launched into a dramatic speech about how she was simply enforcing community access rights and using the land for health and alignment. The officer nodded slowly, then asked, "Did you force your way in with a crowbar?" Karen's face turned a pale shade of pink. "No, I just opened the gate. I have the right to inspect." "This is private property," the officer said. There are cameras showing you used a tool to break in. That's criminal trespass. Her mouth opened then closed. Her eyes darted to me. He's fencing in land that isn't his. He's blocking common access. I handed the officer the survey documents again, the permit, and a printout of the property plat from the city's own database. The officer took one look, passed it to his partner, then looked back at Karen. You're not allowed to be here. You need to leave now. She tried to argue, but her voice cracked. This wasn't going her way, and the usual mixture of charm and complaint wasn't landing anymore. The officers gave her one final warning, then waited as she packed up her mat, got into the car, and reversed it down my driveway without a word, but not before snapping a photo of my front porch, as if collecting evidence for some imaginary trial. After they left, I spoke to Josh, who handled everything with more calm than I'd expected. She was weird, he said. She kept muttering stuff about how fences ruin communities. I told him he'd done well and that I'd be installing additional locks by the weekend. What Karen didn't know was that I had already taken the footage of her breaking in, zoomed in on the crowbar, enhanced the image to see her face clearly, and compiled it with a timestamped entry log. I sent the whole package to Drew, who added it to our growing file and responded with a short message. This is enough. She's in deep now. That evening, just as the fence crew wrapped up laying concrete and setting panels, I walked the new perimeter and noticed something peculiar. Where Karen's car had been parked earlier, just inside the stake line, there were new tire marks, but also a thick indentation in the grass. She'd driven over the corner drainage line, and the soil had sunk slightly under the weight. I checked the drainage cover and saw hairline cracks forming. If it collapsed, it would flood the eastern side of my property. She hadn't just trespassed. She damaged critical infrastructure. I called the city's public works office and reported it. The inspector came the next day, verified the damage, and filed a formal report that listed unauthorized vehicle presence resulting in minor structural compromise. He even offered to testify if needed. I didn't tell Karen any of this. I let her live in the illusion that she was still winning, still uncatchable, still the queen of this silent chess game. But I had already taken her rook, her bishop, and her queen without her noticing. She was down to pawns, and they were retreating. Later that week, the final panels were installed, bolted, and painted. The last screws sealed the entire perimeter, connecting the front gate with the new east and south walls, forming a single unbroken line of security and ownership. The land was mine, protected, certified, and inaccessible from every angle, except one, Karen's Lexus. She'd parked it again the night before while I was out. I found it early in the morning, half on the driveway, half inside the yard, nose toward the newly sealed corner. She was nowhere in sight, probably asleep or pretending not to see. So, I did the only thing that felt right. I walked to the contractor's truck and asked the foreman, "You ever fenced around a vehicle?" He grinned. "Can't say I have, but I'd love to try." The crew got to work. They installed the last gatepost beside the bumper, leaving just enough room to prove we hadn't touched the car. When they were done, her vehicle sat like a prop on a museum stage, completely surrounded by fence, utterly inaccessible without a key or a tow. I left a note on the driver's side window. Private property, unauthorized vehicle, fenced in for safekeeping. Contact owner to retrieve. Gate code not provided. I expected rage. I expected a knock at midnight or a threatening HOA letter. But what I got was silence, the kind that signals retreat or the preparation of something louder. Karen wasn't done, but neither was I. And this time, the next move would be made in front of everyone. The silence that followed Karen's fenced-in Lexus felt more like the eye of a storm than the end of one. I knew her type too well. She didn't retreat. She regrouped. So when nearly 48 hours passed without a single knock, phone call, or passive-aggressive HOA letter, I stayed alert. I walked the fence line twice a day, checked camera feeds, monitored the motion alert. Nothing moved near the car. No one attempted a retrieval. It just sat there like a chrome monument to her arrogance, encircled by the very boundary she had tried so hard to erase. But the stillness broke on Saturday morning when a familiar silver sedan rolled to a stop at the foot of my driveway and outstepped Officer Barnes, one of the two who had responded to the yoga incident. He had a weary smile and a clipboard under his arm. "You fenced in a car," he said, no judgment in his tone, just the resigned curiosity of a man who'd seen stranger things and knew this town was far from boring. "I fenced in a trespasser's car," I corrected. "That's different." He chuckled, then got serious. "We got a call from Karen. She claims you're unlawfully detaining her personal property. Wants to press charges for illegal impound." I handed him a folder with photos, timestamps, permit approvals, and the incident log. He flipped through them slowly, nodding. "This is solid. She left it on your land after being warned. No damage to the vehicle. Fence was built legally and with notice. As far as the law's concerned, she parked it in a trap of her own making." I nodded. "Then why are you here?" "Protocol," he said. "She wants to make a statement, and since it's a civil matter, we're advising her to resolve it through court or tow services, but you'll probably get a visit from someone else." He wasn't wrong. That visit came the next day in the form of a local news reporter named Melissa Chin. She knocked politely, introduced herself, and said she'd been following a trending video, namely the ring footage of Karen forcing her way into my property and the follow-up photo of her car, now viral under the caption, "Queen Karen, caged by her own drama." Apparently, someone on the fencing crew had posted it, and it had made the rounds faster than wildfire. "Would you be willing to speak on record?" Melissa asked, eyes wide with curiosity. I thought for a second, this wasn't just about land anymore. It was about showing people like Karen that their entitled crusades had limits. "As long as you show both sides," I said. "The documents, the harassment, all of it." The interview took place on my porch with the black fence behind me and the reflection of Karen's trapped Lexus just barely visible through the slat. Melissa asked thoughtful questions not just about the incident, but about the culture of neighborhoods like ours, where a HOA sometimes became miniature kingdoms ruled by people desperate for control. I spoke calmly, laid out the facts, and emphasized that this wasn't revenge. It was about boundaries, law, and protecting my family. Within 2 days, the story aired. The footage was clean, the facts clear, and Karen's face captured during her porch entry and yoga stunt broadcast to the entire county. By Monday, the pressure started mounting. 3 different neighbors came by separately to say they supported me. One of them, Susan, from 2 doors down, whispered that Karen had once fined her for using the wrong mulch color. "I didn't even know brown came in shades," she said, shaking her head. Another neighbor, Mark, admitted that Karen had been behind an anonymous complaint that led to a citation when his nephew parked a moving truck on the street for more than 45 minutes. "She hides behind bylaws like they're holy text," he muttered. "But the second someone pushes back, she calls foul." The tide was turning. By Wednesday, I received a notice. This time, not from Karen, but from the HOA board itself. It was a formal invitation to a special meeting regarding alleged abuses of power and leadership concerns. It was clear that the board was cracking and Karen's grip was loosening. But just as I thought she might step down quietly, she made one final attempt to twist the narrative. On Thursday, I was pulling weeds in the backyard when I heard voices approaching the gate. I looked up to see Karen standing there with a man in a suit, tan blazer, briefcase, sunglasses. She called out, "This is him. This is where the illegal impound happened." The man stepped forward. "Sir, I'm representing Ms. Wilcox in a civil matter regarding the unlawful enclosure of her vehicle. We are here to serve you with notice of intent to sue for damages, emotional distress, and loss of access to personal property." I took the envelope, opened it calmly, and skimmed the content. It was legal sounding, sure, but like most of Karen's paper threats, it was bloated with bluff and light on actual precedent. I smiled. "You'll want to read page 3 of the permit documents. And while you're at it, ask your client why she left a second key buried in my yard and broke in with a crowbar. There's video, multiple angles." The man blinked. "There's footage. There's an entire archive," I said. "Would you like a USB or a Dropbox link?" He didn't answer. Karen looked rattled again, her lips tightening like she was trying not to scream. The man turned, said he'd be in touch, and they left without another word. I wasn't worried. Drew had already prepared a legal response, and we were compiling a countersuit for harassment, property damage, and defamation. But what struck me most was Karen's desperation. She wasn't just losing a fight. She was losing her identity. Being the HOA president was her whole personality, her entire sense of power. Without it, she was just another neighbor with too much time and too little grace. That night, Josh and I sat on the porch watching the sun go down behind the fence posts he'd helped paint. He asked if Karen was going to jail. I laughed and said, probably not, but that people like her sometimes needed public embarrassment more than punishment. Is it over now? He asked. I shook my head. Almost. She's got 1 or 2 tricks left, I think. But after that, she'll have nowhere left to run. Just as the words left my mouth, a new email came in from Melissa. The story had picked up national attention. A larger network wanted to run a follow-up featuring both the HOA issue and the broader question of neighborhood power struggles. I agreed, and when I told Josh, he grinned. Can I be in it? You might just be the hero, I said. After all, you were the one who called 911. That weekend, another envelope appeared on Karen's door. Not from me, not from the police, but from the HOA board itself, a vote of no confidence, a scheduled date for removal, and a warning. Any attempt to interfere would be met with suspension and legal review. It was the first time the community had stood against her as a group. The silence that had once shielded her was gone. The fear she thrived on had turned inward. And still her Lexus sat in the same spot, boxed in by fence panels, baking in the July sun like a forgotten relic. She had tried to make me the villain of her story. But I had simply written her out of mine. By the time the sun rose on Monday morning, the mood in the neighborhood had changed like the air before a summer storm. What had once been tight-lipped tension was now quiet curiosity, cautious nods, and the subtle turning of heads every time someone passed the fence that now enclosed Karen's prized Lexus like a rare animal in a zoo. I didn't hear complaints. I didn't get side eyes. What I got were neighbors watering their lawns a little closer to my property, lingering a little longer, trying to peek without seeming nosy. The woman who always walked her dog at 6:30 a.m. waved at me for the first time in months. And when I went to grab my mail, Greg from the HOA board pulled up slowly, rolled down his window, and with a smirk said, "Looks like Karen's out of parking options." I didn't need to answer. The fence spoke for itself. It was the cleanest kind of justice, quiet, legal, and inescapable. And yet, even as the victory settled into the soil of my yard, I knew Karen wouldn't let it end there. She was the type who believed that losing only meant you hadn't screamed loudly enough. I half expected a drone to fly over the fence, dropping another printed fake citation tied to a rock. But what came next was both dumber and darker. At 2:13 p.m., as I sat on the back porch finishing coffee and sorting through paperwork with Drew's latest legal draft open beside me, a low grinding noise reached my ears. Metallic, repetitive. I stood slowly and followed the sound toward the gate. It was coming from the side yard, the part still under light landscaping where the soil hadn't yet settled fully. I moved quietly along the inside of the fence, tracking the noise until I spotted the source through a knot hole. There, crouched behind one of the panels was Rick. Same scruffy jacket, same twitchy energy. And in his hand, a battery-powered saw. He was trying to cut through the post base, not the fence slats, not even the padlock, the actual concrete foot of the corner post. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. He was grinding at it like a man trying to tunnel out of a jail cell with a spoon. I took a step back, checked my phone, and tapped into the security feed from the side camera. Sure enough, it caught him in clear detail, face visible, tool buzzing, his movements erratic and desperate. I hit record and called the non-emergency police line. It was the third time I'd had to report a trespass in less than 2 weeks, but this time I had ironclad evidence and a clear intent to damage. They arrived in less than 10 minutes. By then, Rick had managed to grind about half an inch into the side of the post. Dust and gravel scattered at his feet, his saw battery dying in real time. The moment the officers rounded the fence, he bolted. He didn't make it far. They caught him before he even cleared Karen's front lawn. When they brought him back around, he tried to claim he was investigating a structural hazard, but the footage, the tool, and the obvious damage shut that story down fast. I didn't press full charges. I wasn't interested in court dates over a guy who'd clearly been manipulated, but I did file a damage report and had him issued a formal warning. Karen, who had been watching the whole thing from behind her blinds, came outside screaming. "You can't arrest him. He was acting on community safety concerns. That post is illegal." The officers ignored her. One of them calmly told her she was now being investigated for inciting property damage and trespass through proxy. Her mouth opened like it always did when she thought she was the smartest person in the room. But the words didn't come out. For the first time, the badge didn't flinch at her tone. She backed off. I stood there, arms crossed, watching her face change when she realized the shield of impunity she'd wrapped herself in for years had finally torn. The next day, the HOA held their special meeting. It was scheduled quietly, but word got out. I didn't attend. I didn't need to. Neighbors who'd never so much as looked at me before came up to shake my hand as they walked in. I stayed on my porch sipping coffee, watching the shadows of people filing into the community center like they were finally choosing sides. It lasted less than an hour. At the end of it, Greg returned with a slip of paper. "It's done," he said. "She's been removed effective immediately. We're sending her formal notice tomorrow, and we're reversing every fine she issued without full vote." I thanked him and offered him a chair, but he smiled and said, "I've got to go take down a President's Reserve sign from the HOA office parking spot." I couldn't help but laugh. But the moment that cemented it all came just 2 hours later when a flatbed tow truck rolled into the neighborhood, turned onto my street, and stopped just outside the newly painted gate. The driver got out and rang the bell. "Got an order to retrieve a Lexus from inside a fence. Belongs to a Karen Wilcox." I nodded and opened the gate just enough for him to walk through. We walked the perimeter together, and when he saw the placement, he chuckled. "Never seen one boxed in like this before. Not even in city impounds." He radioed for a second guy, and together they carefully used a compact lift and rigging system to haul the vehicle up and over the fence panels without touching anything. They worked like surgeons, professional and quiet. Within 40 minutes, the car was gone. The fence was untouched. And Karen, who had been hiding behind her curtains the whole time, stepped outside just as the truck turned the corner. She stared at the empty space where her car had been. And for once she said nothing, no threats, no glares, no finger pointing, just silence. She walked back inside, closed the door, and didn't come out for the rest of the day. I stood there for a moment, hands on hips, watching the dust settle where her tires had once sat, and felt something I hadn't felt since this all began. Peace. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was just stillness, the kind you only get when someone finally understands that they lost. That night, as Josh and I sat on the back porch under the dim string lights we'd hung months ago and never turned on out of sheer exhaustion, he asked me if we could leave them up this time. I smiled and nodded. "Yeah," I said. "I think they can stay." He leaned back in the old wooden chair, legs kicked out, and said, "It's funny. She tried everything and all it took was a fence." I laughed. "Not just a fence, buddy. The truth, some patience, and about 7 yards of concrete resolve." He smiled, but then added something I wasn't expecting. "You know, we should probably plant something there where the car was, like, so she knows it's not coming back." I looked out over the yard, the fresh earth, the clean border of our life reclaimed inch by inch. "Yeah," I said, "let's plant something permanent." We didn't say what, but we both knew. Something strong, something deep-rooted, something that couldn't be moved with a crowbar or threatened away with paper. Because the land wasn't just protected now. It was ours again, every square inch. And this time, no key, master or otherwise, would ever open it again. It rained the night after the tow truck took Karen's car away, soft and steady, the kind of cleansing storm that soaks the dust out of everything and leaves the world smelling like a clean slate. The drops tapped gently on the metal roof while Josh and I sat quietly inside, sipping cocoa, neither of us saying much, because we both knew something big had ended. For the first time in what felt like months, there was no threat waiting behind a gate, no printed notice under the door, no stare down through the blinds across the street, just rain and peace and the smell of something fresh growing. But peace has a strange way of stirring up everything that came before it. The following morning, I stepped out onto the porch and found a pale yellow envelope sitting at the foot of the front step. It was hand-delivered, no stamp, but addressed with precise handwriting and sealed with the kind of care that made me instantly suspicious. I opened it slowly, unsure whether to brace for another invented legal threat or a final pathetic protest. But what I found was stranger than anything I'd expected. Inside was a resignation letter, formal, typed, signed by Karen herself. No ranting, no finger-pointing, no dramatic accusations, just a quiet declaration that she was stepping down from all HOA-related positions effective immediately. She cited health concerns, mental stress, and an increased need for personal reflection. For a woman who had tried to bulldoze her way through law, logic, and community willpower for years, it read almost like a confession. It wasn't an apology, not exactly, but it was the closest thing I was ever going to get. I stood there reading it twice, then folded it neatly and slid it into the file drawer in my garage, where I had stored every document, photo, and printed threat she'd ever sent. Not out of spite, but for the record, a trail of her slow unraveling, paper by paper, leading to that quiet white flag. By midweek, the neighborhood seemed to exhale. The board replaced the president's sign in front of the clubhouse with a neutral plaque. The HOA's email template lost its aggressive all-caps formatting. And then without fanfare, Karen's house went up for sale. No grand moving trucks, no open house, just a for sale by owner sign placed in the center of her yard. The price printed in fine ink at the bottom and taped to the top of the post. A gleaming little symbol that caught the morning sun. A key, not a house key, not a gate key, a master key, painted gold and glued in place, tilted ever so slightly like it had been mounted for decoration. I stared at it from across the street, arms folded, lips pressed into a line, because I knew it wasn't an accident. It was her last message. Not to threaten, not to reclaim, just to remind. As if to say, I still had the key all along. I just never figured out the door. I didn't tell Josh about it. He was too busy helping me dig the garden bed where her car used to sit, scraping away the last tire tracks and laying mulch down like it was sacred soil. We'd gone to the nursery the day before and picked out a Japanese maple. Small now, but destined to grow tall and wide. Its deep red leaves a year-round blaze against the green. We planted it in the exact center of the former parking spot, watered it carefully, and stepped back. Josh looked at me and said, "That's never moving, is it?" I shook my head. "Not unless a tornado carries it out." He smiled. "Good. That way, she'll know." By the weekend, the story had made national headlines. The local reporter Melissa returned with a film crew from a major network, asking if I'd be willing to participate in a follow-up segment. This time, they wanted to feature it not as a quirky neighborhood dispute, but as a story about power, justice, and what it looks like when ordinary people push back against control. I agreed, not because I wanted fame, but because I wanted the quiet people in other neighborhoods, the ones who were afraid to speak up, to know that they weren't alone. The segment aired 3 days later, complete with drone shots of the fence, clips from the Ring cameras, and a moment of Josh standing next to the maple tree talking about how his dad taught him what boundaries meant. They cut to Karen only once, her walking quickly out of her house, covering her face as the reporters tried to ask questions. She didn't say a word. She just climbed into a rental car and drove off without looking back. When the piece aired, my inbox flooded with messages from strangers across the country. Some were from people who'd fought similar battles against HOAs, against school boards, against petty tyrants in petty kingdoms. Others just wanted to say thank you or tell me that the story gave them courage. It was humbling, surreal, but also deeply satisfying to know that something born from frustration and chaos had become a kind of beacon. Not because it was dramatic, but because it ended the way so many things should, with truth, with persistence, and with quiet refusal to be pushed. 2 weeks later, a young couple bought Karen's house. They had a toddler, a golden retriever, and no interest in joining the HOA board. They introduced themselves with cookies and asked if I'd mind if they extended their garden closer to the fence line. I laughed and told them they could plant a jungle if they wanted, as long as they didn't mind me occasionally borrowing a tomato. The air felt lighter, the street was quiet, and the fence stood clean and strong, not as a wall to divide, but as a line to respect. That in the end had been the whole point. Not revenge, not punishment, just respect. Respect for land, for law, for the right to live without interference. It was never about locking her out. It was about keeping peace in. Josh asked one evening if we could add lights to the fence. Small solar ones that would blink on at sunset like a landing strip, he said. So if she ever flies back in, she knows exactly where not to land. I laughed harder than I had in weeks. We bought the lights. We installed them. And that night, as the fence glowed faintly in the darkness, casting soft lines across the lawn, I realized something I hadn't noticed until then. For the first time since we'd moved into that house, I didn't feel like I was defending something. I felt like I was home. Fully, truly, irreversibly home. And the only key that mattered anymore was the one that fit the door inside. The one that let my son walk safely from his room to the garden. The one that didn't have to be buried, hidden, or copied. Just used properly, peacefully. Because in the end, the fence wasn't the trap. The trap had always been thinking that power could replace permission, that noise could replace truth. Karen had never understood that. She wielded keys like weapons, rules like swords. But I had built something better, quiet, legal, and stronger than all the noise in the world. And the best part, it locked from the inside.